I always thought tax nightmares were fiction until a letter sat perfectly centered on my doorstep. $247,000. It listed my name, but the address belonged to someone else. The terrifying part wasn't the debt, but how quickly my parents reacted. As if they had rehearsed this script for years. If they were willing to throw me to the wolves to save themselves, I had to ask just how far they would actually go. My name is Cora Nelson, and up until 24 hours ago, my life was boring by design. I liked it that way. I worked in compliance. I paid my rent on time, and I kept my head down. But when I stepped off the pavement and onto the porch of my building in Richmond, the first crack in that carefully curated existence appeared at the tip of my boot. It was 11:45 at night. The humidity of the Virginia summer was clinging to everything, making the air feel heavy and used. My building was old, the kind with a shared front stoop that collected the city's debris, takeout menus, dead leaves, the grit of street traffic. The welcome mat was a faded, fraying rectangle of brown fiber that hadn't been truly cleaned since the 90s, but the envelope sitting on it was pristine. That was the first thing that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It was stark white, rectangular, and terrifyingly official. It wasn't jammed halfway into the doorframe, and it wasn't tossed carelessly near the railing like the junk mail usually was. It was centered. It was placed there with geometric precision, parallel to the threshold. It was so clean, it looked like a prop on a movie set. I leaned down and picked it up. My fingers brushed the paper, and I felt a jolt of static electricity, or maybe it was just pure adrenaline, in the upper left corner. The return address was bold and unmistakable. Department of the Treasury, Internal Revenue Service. The window on the envelope displayed my name, Cora Nelson, typed in that distinct, soulless government font, but the address below my name was wrong. It wasn't my apartment address. It wasn't even close. I unlocked my door, fumbled with the deadbolt, and practically fell into my hallway. I threw the locks back into place immediately, a reflex born of sudden, inexplicable paranoia. The air inside my apartment was cool and smelled of the lavender diffuser I kept on the bookshelf. But I couldn't breathe. I tossed the envelope onto the kitchen island as if it were contaminated with anthrax. I needed to wash my hands. It was an irrational impulse, but I walked straight to the sink, pumped the soap 3 times, and scrubbed. I scrubbed until the water ran hot and my knuckles turned red. I was trying to control a small thing because I knew, deep down in my gut, that a massive thing was about to spiral out of my control. I dried my hands on a paper towel, took a deep breath, and walked back to the island. I picked up the letter opener. I sliced the top edge of the envelope. The sound of tearing paper seemed deafening in the quiet apartment. I pulled out the notice. I unfolded it. My eyes scanned past the dense paragraphs of codes and statutes, hunting for the number. The human brain always looks for the number first. When I saw it, the floor seemed to tilt to the left. Amount due, $247,000. I had to blink and look again, certain that I was misreading a decimal point or a reference number, but there it was, black on white, undeniable, $247,000. I read my name again, Cora Nelson. It was spelled correctly. There was no middle initial error, no typo. They were looking for me. My eyes dropped to the bold text in the middle of the page. Notice of intent to seize your property or rights to property. A cold sweat broke out across my hairline. Property? I looked around my rental unit. I owned a 5-year-old sedan, a laptop, and maybe $3,000 in a savings account. I didn't have property, but the threat wasn't about what I had. It was about the power they had to take it. They could garnish wages. They could freeze accounts. They could erase me. I forced myself to stop shaking. I am a compliance officer. I deal with rules and regulations for a living. I know that documentation is the only shield against chaos. I pulled my phone from my pocket and turned on the camera. I photographed the entire letter. I took a close-up of the reference number at the top right. I photographed the date of issuance, which was 10 days ago. I photographed the specific tax period listed. Then I photographed the envelope itself, focusing on the lack of a postmark. Wait, I zoomed in on the picture of the envelope. There was no cancellation stamp, no barcode from the sorting machine, no postage meter mark. This letter hadn't gone through the United States Postal Service. Someone had physically placed this on my doormat. The question hit me like a physical blow. Who? Who has access to an IRS notice addressed to me, sent to a wrong address, and then decides to hand-deliver it to my apartment in the middle of the night without knocking? My mind instantly flashed to the two scenarios. Scenario 1. Identity theft. Some stranger stole my info, ran up a debt, and then, what? Taunted me with the bill? That made no sense. Criminals hide evidence. They don't deliver it. Scenario 2. Someone who knows me. I looked at the address on the letter again. It wasn't my parents' house, but it was in their zip code. I dialed my mother. It was late, but I knew Cynthia Nelson would be awake. She claimed she did her best thinking after midnight. The phone rang 3 times before she picked up. Cora? Her voice was warm, dripping with that sugary southern charm that she could turn on like a faucet. Is everything all right, honey? It is so late. Mom, I said, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. I found something on my doorstep. A package? Did you order something? No, it is a letter. From the IRS. I waited. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. The IRS? She asked. The tone shifted. It was the performance of concern. Pitch perfect. Oh my God. Cora, what does it say? It says I owe $247,000. I heard a gasp. It was a theatrical gasp, the kind you hear in bad daytime television. That is impossible. 200? Cora, you have never made that kind of money. There must be a mistake. Oh, my poor baby. You must be terrified. I am terrified, I said, watching the letter on the counter. It says they are going to seize my property. Then I heard the rustling on the other end. The phone was being passed. Cora? My father's voice was different. Grant Nelson didn't do theatrical gasps. He did calm. He did authority. He was the captain of the ship, even when the ship was burning. Dad, I said, I have a notice here. It is— Listen to me, he cut in, his voice smooth and low. Do not panic. You are hyperventilating. I can hear it. Just take a breath. I wasn't hyperventilating. I was standing perfectly still. It is probably identity theft, he said, the explanation rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. It happens all the time now. People get hold of a social security number, and things go haywire. We will get it sorted. Dad, the amount does not matter because it is not real, he said firmly. Bring the paperwork over tomorrow. We will call Elliot. He will fix it. I froze. My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles turned white. The paperwork, I repeated slowly. Yes, bring the letter, he said, a hint of impatience creeping in. I didn't tell you it was paperwork. Dad, I said. I just said I got a letter. I didn't tell you it was a stack of forms. I didn't tell you it was pages long. How did you know to call it paperwork? There was a pause, a heavy, loaded silence that screamed louder than any confession. It is a figure of speech, Cora, he said, his tone sharpening. Don't be dramatic. Just come over tomorrow. We are trying to help you. He hung up before I could answer. I stared at the phone screen as it went black. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't confused. He was managing me. He had used the word paperwork because he had seen it. He knew exactly what was sitting on my counter because he, or someone he sent, had put it there. The clean envelope, the lack of a postmark, the practiced shock from Mom, the instant explanation from Dad. They didn't just know about the debt. They were waiting for me to find it. My phone did not stop ringing. It vibrated against the granite countertop like a trapped insect, the screen lighting up with the word Mom over and over again. I stared at it for a full minute before I slid my finger across the glass to answer. I knew exactly what was coming. Cora, you need to come over here right now, my mother said. Her voice had shifted from the theatrical shock of 5 minutes ago to a frantic, smothering urgency. You should not be alone right now, not with something like this hanging over your head. It is too much for one person. It sounded like love. To anyone else, it would have sounded exactly like a mother terrified for her daughter's well-being. But I had 34 years of experience decoding Cynthia Nelson. This was not concern. This was containment. She did not want me safe. She wanted me within arm's reach. She wanted me in her kitchen, drinking her tea, listening to her version of reality until my own started to fade. If I went over there, the letter would end up in a drawer in my father's office, and I would never see it again. I am staying here. Mom, I said, leaning my hip against the counter. I kept my voice flat. I need to organize my thoughts. Do not be stubborn, she snapped, her sweetness fracturing for a split second before she plastered it back together. At least send me a picture of the letter. Send it right now. Your father wants to look at the codes. He thinks he can figure out which error they made. I already looked at the codes, I lied. I hadn't looked at the specific codes yet, but I wasn't about to give them a copy of the evidence. I don't need Dad to interpret it. I can read. Why are you being like this? Her voice dropped to a whisper, trembling with manufactured hurt. Why don't you trust me? Cora, we are your family. We are the only ones on your side. That was the hook, the guilt. It was a weapon she wielded with surgical precision. For years, that question, why don't you trust me, had made me fold. It had made me apologize for things I hadn't done. But tonight, with the threat of financial ruin sitting on my kitchen island, the hook didn't catch. It just scraped against the surface. Give me the phone, Cynthia. My father's voice replaced hers. It was not a request. He was done with the good cop routine. Cora, he said. The single word was a warning. Listen to me very carefully. You are tired. You are emotional. You are letting your imagination run away with you. Do not start throwing around accusations when you do not have the facts. The air in my kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. Accusations? I asked softly. Dad, I haven't accused anyone of anything. I just told you I got a letter. The silence on the other end was heavy. He had slipped. In his rush to control the narrative, he had defended himself against a charge I hadn't even made yet. By telling me not to blame anyone, he was implicitly admitting there was someone to blame. An innocent father would ask what was happening, not tell me who not to fight. I am saying, he said, his tone hardening into the voice he used when firing employees, that you need to bring that paperwork to me so I can handle it. I am not asking you, Cora, I am telling you, bring it here. I think I will hold on to it for tonight, I said. Cora, if you... I tapped the red button. The call ended. The silence that followed was far more terrifying than his shouting. Hanging up on Grant Nelson was not something people did. It was a declaration of war. I stood there, my hand shaking slightly, waiting for the phone to ring again. I waited for the sound of his car pulling into the driveway, but nothing happened. The silence stretched out, filling the corners of the apartment. I could not sit down. If I sat down, I would start crying. And if I started crying, I would lose. I walked to the window and checked the blinds. Closed. I checked the deadbolt. Locked. I went to my laptop and opened it. The blue light of the screen felt clinical. Safe. I typed 3 letters into the search bar. IRS. I didn't go to the forums. I didn't go to the help sites. I went straight to the official government guidelines. I read about dispute processes. I read about collections. I read about identity theft. The term identity theft affidavit flashed on the screen. Form 14039. I downloaded it. I needed to know exactly what they thought I owed. The letter said $247,000, but it didn't say how they got to that number. I needed the transcripts. I picked up my phone to call the automated line, then put it down. No, I didn't want a call center. I didn't want a tired voice in a cubicle reading from a script. I wanted eyes. I wanted to see a human being look at my file and tell me the truth. I searched for the nearest taxpayer assistance center. There was one in Richmond, downtown. not far from where I worked. I navigated to the appointment scheduler. My heart hammered against my ribs as I looked at the calendar. There was an opening for 8:30 the next morning, a cancellation. Probably. I clicked confirm. I wasn't going to my parents' house tomorrow. I was going to the source. I spent the next 2 hours turning my living room into a war room. I pulled my personal file box from the closet. I printed my tax returns from the last 3 years. They were simple forms. Single income. Standard deduction. I made $48,000 a year until my promotion last year, when I bumped up to 55. The idea that I could generate a $250,000 tax bill was mathematically impossible based on my salary. I grabbed my lease agreement. I grabbed my electric bills from Dominion Energy. I grabbed my car insurance statements. I needed to prove where I lived. I needed to prove that the address on that tax notice, my parents' address, was a lie. I stacked the papers in a neat pile next to the door. My hands were dry from washing them earlier, but they felt dirty again. I felt like I was building a case against my own history at 1:15 in the morning. My phone buzzed one last time. It was a text message. It wasn't from Mom. It was from Dad. I stared at the screen, the white letters glowing in the dark room. It was just 4 words. Don't do anything stupid. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time. If he were innocent, he would have texted, "I love you." He would have texted, "We will fix this together." He would have texted, "Call me in the morning." But he didn't. He texted a threat disguised as advice. Don't do anything stupid. He wasn't afraid of the IRS. He wasn't afraid of the money. Grant Nelson had been dodging financial bullets his entire career. He probably viewed the debt as just another negotiation. No, he wasn't scared of the government. He was scared of me. He was scared that I was finally waking up. He was scared that for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to just nod and sign the paper. He was terrified that I was going to drag the one thing he hated most out into the light, the truth. I turned off the phone. I didn't reply. I walked over to the stack of documents by the door, placed the IRS notice on top of the pile, and turned off the lights. I didn't sleep, but I didn't cry either. I just lay in the dark, waiting for the sun to rise, so I could go start the fire. The Taxpayer Assistance Center was a vacuum where hope went to die. It was located in a brutalist concrete building downtown, the kind of architecture that screams federal authority. Inside, the air was recycled and dry, smelling faintly of toner ink and floor wax. I sat in a hard plastic chair bolted to the floor, my knees pressed together, clutching my folder of documents like a shield. There were signs everywhere. No cell phone use, no photography, no video recording. Silence was enforced not by a librarian, but by the sheer weight of the institution. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz, casting everything in a sickly, shadowless pallor. When my number was finally called, I walked to Station 4. Behind the glass partition sat a woman who looked like she had seen every variety of human financial misery and remained entirely unmoved by it. Her nameplate read, Marissa Gomez. She wore a sensible navy blazer, and her expression was not unkind, but it was terrifyingly neutral. It was the face of the system. "Good morning," she said, her voice devoid of inflection. "ID and appointment confirmation, please." I slid my driver's license and the printout across the counter. My hands were trembling, just a little, but enough for the paper to shake. Agent Gomez didn't look at my hands. She looked at the screen, typed in a sequence of commands that sounded like gunfire on the keyboard, and then looked at my ID. She verified my face against the plastic card, then back to the screen. "You are here regarding notice CP504, she stated, not asking. "Intent to seize assets." "Yes," I said. My throat felt like sandpaper. "But I think there is a mistake. I brought my W-2s. I brought my tax returns. I don't make enough money to owe $247,000. It is mathematically impossible." Agent Gomez didn't nod. She didn't offer reassurance. She just clicked her mouse. Click, click, click. Then she stopped. It wasn't a dramatic stop. She didn't gasp. She just stopped typing and leaned in slightly toward her monitor. Her eyes narrowed a fraction of a millimeter. It was a professional silence. The kind of silence a doctor makes when they see a shadow on an X-ray that shouldn't be there. That silence was louder than my father's shouting. It told me that this wasn't a clerical error. It wasn't a misplaced decimal point. "Ms. Nelson," she said, finally turning her gaze back to me. "This balance due is not from your personal income tax. This is not about your Form 1040. I blinked. "I don't understand. If it is not my income tax, what is it?" "This is a trust fund recovery penalty," she said. She spoke the words clearly, pronouncing every syllable. "It is assessed against the responsible party for unpaid business payroll taxes." The room seemed to tilt. "Business?" I repeated, the word tasting foreign in my mouth. "I don't have a business. I work in compliance for a consulting firm. I am an employee. I have never owned a business in my life." Agent Gomez looked at me. She wasn't looking for a lie. She was looking for the disparity between my statement and her screen. "According to our records, you are the designated responsible officer for a limited liability company that failed to remit federal withholding taxes for 4 consecutive quarters." "What company?" I demanded. The panic was rising now, clawing at my chest. "What is the name of the company?" She looked at the screen again. "Nelson Vista Care, LLC." The name hit me like a physical slap. Nelson Vista Care, my parents' company, the assisted living facility they had run for 15 years, the family business, the pride and joy that my father spoke about at Thanksgiving dinners, boasting about how they provided dignity to the elderly, the business that paid for their vacations and their cars. "That is my parents' company," I whispered. "My father runs that company. Grant Nelson." "Grant Nelson is listed as the submitting agent," Gomez said, her voice remaining perfectly flat. "But you, Cora Nelson, are listed as the responsible party. The officer with the authority to collect, account for, and pay over the tax." "That is not true," I said, my voice rising. I saw a security guard near the door shift his weight. Looking at me, I forced myself to lower my volume. "I have never worked there. I have never signed a check for them. I don't even have a key to the building." Agent Gomez didn't argue. She simply typed another command. The laser printer behind her whirred to life. It churned out 3 pages of warm, crisp paper. She collected them, stapled them once in the corner, and slid them under the glass partition. "This is the submission summary for the change of officer form filed 2 years ago," she said. "It designated you as the managing member with full financial authority." I looked down at the paper. It was a standard IRS form. Line 1. Entity name, Nelson Vista Care, LLC. Line 2. Effective date, January 14th, 2 years ago. Line 3. Submitted by Grant Nelson. My eyes burned as I stared at my father's name. He had done this. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had filed a form. He had sat down, filled out the paperwork, and mailed it in. He had transferred the liability of the unpaid taxes, the money he had likely spent on himself instead of sending to the government, onto me. "Look at the next page," Gomez said. I turned the page. It was a signature page. At the bottom, above the line labeled "Signature of Officer," was my name, Cora Nelson. I stared at it. The room went silent. It was a good forgery. It wasn't a clumsy scribble. It had the right loop on the C. It had the sharp N that I used. To a stranger, to a bank teller, to an IRS agent. It looked perfect, but I knew my own hand. The rhythm was wrong. The slant was just a degree too vertical. I write with a heavy hand. The pen digs into the paper. This signature floated. It was written with the confident, sweeping motion of someone who wasn't afraid of getting caught. It was written by someone who had practiced my signature, someone who had seen it on permission slips, on birthday cards, on college applications. "That is not my signature," I said. My voice was trembling. But this time it wasn't fear. It was a cold, hard realization. "It looks like mine, but I didn't write it. Agent Gomez looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time, she saw the shock. She saw the realization that I wasn't fighting the government. I was fighting my own blood. "Ms. Nelson," she said, and her voice dropped an octave, becoming less bureaucratic and more human. "The IRS does not ask who spent the money. We ask who had the authority to pay it, right now, on paper. That is you. Until you prove otherwise, you are the one we are looking at." "How do I prove it?" I asked. "It is his word against mine. He has a document." "Forgery is a crime," she said. "Identity theft is a crime, but to prove it, you cannot just say it, you have to show it. You need to file an affidavit. You need police reports. You need to challenge the validity of this document." She pointed a manicured finger at the signature. "If you claim this is fraud," she said, "you are initiating a criminal investigation against the person who submitted it. Do you understand what that means?" I looked at the line again, submitted by Grant Nelson. If I fought this, I wasn't just disputing a bill, I was accusing my father of a federal crime. I was putting him in the crosshairs of the very agency that was currently hunting me. I thought about his text message from last night. "Don't do anything stupid." He knew I would come here. He knew I would see this. He was betting on the fact that I was too weak, too dutiful, too much of a good daughter to point the finger back at him. He thought he could use my loyalty as a shield against his debt. I looked up at Agent Gomez. "I understand," I said. "I want to file the affidavit." She nodded. Once. A single, sharp motion. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a fresh form. "Let's get started," she said. The machine had found its target, but for the first time since I opened that letter, the target wasn't me. It was the man who signed my name. Agent Gomez slid the affidavit across the laminate counter. It was 4 pages of dense text titled, "Identity Theft Affidavit." But to me, it looked like a declaration of war. She didn't hand me a pen immediately. Instead, she turned back to her keyboard, her fingers moving with a rhythmic, percussive intensity. "I am placing a marker on your personal tax account," she said, her eyes never leaving the screen. "This will freeze any automated enforcement actions against your personal assets while the investigation is pending. It stops the clock on the seizures, at least temporarily." I exhaled, a sound that was half breath, half sob. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," she said, her voice tight. "We are just stopping the bleeding. We haven't removed the knife." She hit the enter key with a final, decisive snap, then frowned. It was a small movement, a slight creasing of her forehead, but in the sterile silence of that office, it felt like a siren. She leaned closer to the monitor, scrolling up, then down, then up again. "Ms. Nelson," she said slowly, "I am looking at the correspondence history for this entity, the Nelson Vista Care file." "What is it?" I asked, gripping the edge of the counter. "There is a pattern of address updates here that is aggressive." She turned the monitor slightly so I could see, though the text was just a blur of green and black from my angle. "When the change of officer form was submitted, the one assigning the debt to you, there was a simultaneous request to update the mailing address for all tax notices related to this specific liability. Update it to where?" I asked, though the cold pit in my stomach told me I already knew the answer. "To the business address," she said. And then, 3 weeks later, a secondary address was added for care of correspondence, 1112 Oakwood Drive. My parents' house, the house I grew up in. The realization washed over me like ice water. This was why my mother had called me last night with that frantic, smothering sweetness. "Come over so you are not alone. Come over right now." It wasn't about comforting me. It wasn't about maternal instinct. They wanted me in their house so they could control the physical evidence. "They moved the mail," I whispered. "They didn't just steal my name. They stole my mailbox." "It looks that way," Gomez said, her tone clinical. "There are multiple notes here from the system flagging returned mail. followed immediately by phone calls to the priority line to correct the address back to their control. They were actively managing the flow of information to ensure you never saw a warning until the lien was imminent. I felt sick, physically ill. The letter on my doormat hadn't been an accident. It wasn't that the IRS finally found me. It was that my parents had finally slipped up. Or perhaps the local carrier had made a mistake and delivered one stray notice to the address on my driver's license instead of the redirected address in the file. Or maybe, just maybe, my father had dropped it there himself to test me. "I need to prove where I live," I said, my voice shaking. "I need to prove that I have never lived at Oakwood Drive or the business address during this entire tax period." I opened my folder. My hands were moving faster now, driven by a surge of adrenaline that cleared the fog in my brain. I pulled out my lease agreement, the heavy staple holding the pages together catching the light. I pulled out the Dominion energy bills, the water bill, the internet service contract. "Here," I said, sliding the stack under the glass. "I have lived at 405 West Broad Street for 3 years. I have never received mail at the business. I have never authorized an address change." Agent Gomez took the papers. She didn't just glance at them. She scrutinized the dates. She looked at the service periods on the electric bill. She looked at the signatures on the lease. "This is good," she said. "This establishes that the address on the IRS file was falsified to prevent you from receiving due process." She reached for a stamp, a heavy, red rubber stamp, and pressed it onto the copies of my documents. "Received." She signed her initials next to the date. "Now," she said, looking up at me, "I want to see the source document." "The source?" "The fax," she said. "The digital imaging system keeps a copy of the original transmission for the change of responsible party. If they faxed it in, the machine captures everything, the headers, the timestamps, the static." She typed in a request code. The printer behind her whirred to life again, but this time it sounded different, slower, grinding out a high-resolution image. The paper slid into the tray. Agent Gomez picked it up. She looked at it for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she slid it to me. "Look at the top," she said. I looked. It was a grainy black-and-white reproduction of the form I had seen earlier, but this version had the digital artifacts of a fax transmission. Along the very top edge, in a font that looked like it belonged to a calculator from the 1990s, was the transmission header. January 14th, 9:42 a.m. From Nelson Vista Care. Callback 804-555-0199. It was the business line, the phone that sat on the heavy oak desk in my father's office, the phone I had used 1,000 times to call my friends when I was in high school. "They sent it from the office," I said, pointing to the line. "That is their number. That is their fax machine." "It gets better," Gomez said dryly. "Look at the cover sheet." I hadn't looked at the second page yet. I flipped the paper over. It was a standard fax cover sheet, the kind you buy in bulk at an office supply store. To IRS Control, from Grant. But it was the handwritten note in the comment box that made the air leave my lungs. It was written in thick, black marker. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. The loops were wide, the slant aggressive. I knew that handwriting better than I knew my own face. I had seen it on permission slips. I had seen it on birthday checks. I had seen it on the notes he left on the kitchen counter when he was angry. Urgent. The note read, "Add responsible officer. Process today. Avoid levy." My body reacted before my brain did. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight it hurt. My skin went cold. It wasn't just a financial maneuver. It wasn't a sterile accounting trick. It was desperate. Avoid levy. He knew the IRS was coming for the business assets 2 years ago. He knew the walls were closing in. And in that moment of panic, he didn't sell a car. He didn't take out a second mortgage. He didn't call a lawyer. He wrote my name. He wrote urgent because he was in a hurry to sacrifice me. "He wrote this," I said. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from someone else in the room. "That is my father's handwriting. He was rushing to get it processed before you froze the business accounts. That appears to be the case, Gomez said. The timeline matches. The business accounts were flagged for seizure 3 days after this fax was received. Because a new responsible party was designated, you, the collection action against the business assets was paused to allow the new officer time to compliance. He bought himself time by selling you out. I stared at the paper. The evidence didn't scream. It didn't shout. It just lay there. Black ink on white paper. Quiet and undeniable. "Can I started, then stopped. I looked at the no photography sign on the wall. "I need a copy of this." "I cannot give you the official file copy yet," Gomez said. Her voice dropping to a whisper, she glanced at the security camera in the corner, then back at me. She pushed the papers slightly closer to my side of the partition. "But the file is open for your review. If you were to document your own records for your affidavit, that would be expected." She looked away, typing something irrelevant on her screen. I understood. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. The shaking was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I stood up slightly to get the angle right. I didn't want glare. I didn't want shadows. I photographed the fax header, zooming in until the pixels of the phone number were sharp. I photographed the timestamp. I photographed the cover sheet. I focused on the handwritten note. Urgent. I took 3 shots of that word alone. I photographed the signature page again, capturing the contrast between the forged signature and the real fax header above it. I wasn't just taking pictures. I was building a coffin. "I have what I need," I said, putting the phone down. "Good," Gomez said. She pulled the papers back and slid them into a manila folder. "Attach the images to your affidavit. Submit everything to the identity theft portal as soon as you leave this building. The sooner it is in the system, the sooner the lock becomes permanent." She looked at me, her expression softening for the first time. "They will try to contact you," she warned. "When the letter regarding this investigation hits their mailbox, they will know you were here. They will know you challenged it." "I know," I said. "They will try to make you feel like you are the one doing something wrong," she said. "They will say you are hurting the family. They will say it is just money." "It is not just money," I said, looking at the folder where my father's handwriting was now hidden. "It is my life." "Exactly," Gomez said. "Do not answer the phone." I nodded. I gathered my lease, my bills, and my ID. I walked out of the office, past the security guard, and into the bright, blinding sunlight of the Richmond morning. The city looked the same as it had an hour ago, but the world had changed. I had the evidence, I had the header, I had the note. And for the first time in 34 years, I wasn't afraid of what my father would say. I was looking forward to it. I was zipping my bag, ready to walk out the door with the evidence of my father's betrayal safely stored in my phone. When the air in the room changed, it wasn't the temperature. It was the sudden, sharp burst of static from the security guard's radio near the entrance. "Agent Gomez," the guard said, his voice carrying over the low hum of the waiting room. "We have a gentleman at the front desk. He says he is here for the Nelson appointment, claims he has authorization." My stomach dropped. I looked at Gomez. Her eyes snapped from her monitor to me, instantly alert. "Did you call anyone?" she asked. "No one," I said. "I haven't spoken to a soul since I walked in here." "He says his name is Elliot Hargrove," the guard continued. "Says he is the enrolled agent on record." Elliot, the family fix-it man, the guy my father called whenever a contract dispute got messy or a zoning permit needed to be encouraged. I had met him twice at Christmas parties. He was a man who smelled of expensive cologne and compromised ethics. "He knows I am here," I whispered. "My father must have alerts set up on the account. As soon as you accessed the file, they knew." Gomez stood up. She wasn't just a bureaucrat anymore. She was the lead in an investigation. She smoothed her blazer and pressed a button on her desk phone. "Bring him to interview room B," she ordered into the receiver. Then she looked at me. You do not have to see him. We can have him escorted out. I thought about it. I thought about sneaking out the back, avoiding the confrontation, keeping my head down like the good daughter I was raised to be. But the image of that fax header, urgent, was still burned into my retinas. No, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. I want to see what he has. Room B has audio and video recording, Gomez said. Grabbing my file. Follow me. Sit across from the door. Keep your hands on the table where the camera can see them. Do not sign anything. Do not agree to anything. Let me do the talking. Room B was smaller than the cubicle area. It was a windowless box with a gray table, 3 chairs, and a black dome camera mounted in the corner like an unblinking eye. I sat down, clasping my hands together on the cold laminate surface. The door opened. Elliot Hargrove walked in like he owned the building. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car. Charcoal gray and perfectly tailored. He carried a leather briefcase that looked soft enough to sleep on. When he saw me, he put on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. A smile that was meant to be reassuring, but felt like a predator baring its teeth. Cora, he breathed, as if he were relieved. Thank God I caught you. Your father is frantic. He told me you ran off in a panic. He didn't look at Agent Gomez. He didn't acknowledge the federal officer in the room. He focused entirely on me, trying to reestablish the dynamic of the adult talking to the child. I am not in a panic, Elliot, I said. I am in a meeting. Of course, he said, pulling a chair out and sitting down uninvited. He placed his briefcase on the table. Look, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. Grant called me the second he saw the notification. He is worried you are going to say something you cannot take back. He sent me down here to handle the technical side of things so you can go home. He clicked the latches of his briefcase. Snap, snap. The sound echoed in the small room. He pulled out a single sheet of paper. I just need to file this power of attorney, he said, sliding the document toward Agent Gomez with a dismissive flick of his wrist. Form 2848. It authorizes me to represent Cora Nelson in all tax matters for the periods in question. We can suspend this interview and move the discussion to my office, where we can be a bit more comfortable. Gomez didn't pick up the paper. She just looked at it. This is a power of attorney, she stated flatly. Yes, Elliot said, flashing his teeth. Standard procedure. And it is signed? Gomez asked. Signed and dated, Elliot said, tapping the bottom of the page. Cora signed it this morning before she came down here. She was just confused about the process. Weren't you, Cora? He looked at me, his eyes wide and hard. He was commanding me to agree. He was betting on the fact that I wouldn't embarrass him in front of a stranger. He was betting on the silence of the victim. I looked at the paper. There it was again, my name, Cora Nelson, written in that same confident, flowing hand that didn't belong to me. I looked up at the camera in the corner, then at Elliot. I didn't sign that, I said. The air in the room vanished. Elliot's smile froze. It didn't drop. It just calcified. Cora, honey, you are upset. You don't remember. I didn't sign it, I repeated, louder this time. I haven't seen you in 3 years. Elliot, I didn't see you this morning. I didn't sign that paper. Agent Gomez reached out and pulled the document toward her. She didn't treat it like paperwork anymore. She treated it like a weapon found at a crime scene. Mr. Hargrove, Gomez said. Her voice was like steel. You are an enrolled agent, correct? Licensed to practice before the IRS? I am, Elliot said, straightening his tie. He was starting to sweat. I could see a tiny bead forming at his temple. I have been practicing for 20 years. Then you know the regulations regarding the submission of false documents, Gomez said. She looked down at the signature. You are presenting this document to a federal officer, asserting that it is the valid consent of the taxpayer. The taxpayer is sitting right here and says it is a forgery. It is not a forgery, Elliot sputtered, his composure cracking. It is a... There must be a miscommunication. I was told she signed it. Told by whom? Gomez asked. It was a trap, and Elliot walked right into it. By her father, Elliot blurted out. Grant Nelson. He brought the paperwork to my office an hour ago. He said Cora signed it at the house and wanted me to rush down here to help her. The room was silent for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, Elliot Hargrove realized he had made a fatal error. He had just admitted that he didn't witness the signature. He had admitted he took a third party's word for it. Gomez leaned forward. She looked like a wolf who had just cornered a rabbit. So you did not witness the signing? She asked. Well, no. But did you speak to Ms. Nelson? She pressed. Did you call her? Did you verify that she knowingly granted you authority over her financial life before you walked into a federal building and tried to shut down my interview? I assumed, Elliot stammered. He looked at me, pleading now. Cora, I am just trying to help. I am trying to smooth this over so nobody gets hurt. Smooth it over for who? Gomez cut in. Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. For the victim? Or for the man who sent you? Elliot opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at the power of attorney form lying on the table, the paper that was supposed to be his shield, and realized it was now his indictment. Gomez reached into a drawer under the table and pulled out a clear plastic sleeve, the kind with the red tamper evidence seal. She picked up the power of attorney form. She slid it into the bag. She peeled the strip and sealed it. Zip. This document is now seized as evidence of an unauthorized third-party attempt to interfere with an active investigation, Gomez announced formally for the recording. She wrote the time and date on the outside of the bag with a Sharpie. She looked up at Elliot. Mr. Hargrove, your representation of the Nelson Vista Care entity is noted. However, you do not represent Ms. Nelson. If you present another document regarding this taxpayer without her physical presence and verified identification, I will refer you to the Office of Professional Responsibility for immediate license revocation. Do I make myself clear? Elliot turned pale. He stood up, his knees slightly shaky. He grabbed his briefcase. I will be contacting my client, he muttered. You do that, Gomez said. He looked at me one last time. There was no arrogance left. There was only fear. He looked at me like I was a stranger, like he couldn't understand how the quiet girl he remembered had suddenly become a wall he couldn't climb. He turned and hurried out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him. I sat there, staring at the plastic bag on the table. My signature, fake, looped, and lying, was trapped inside. He didn't just forge a signature, I said quietly. No, Gomez said, marking the logbook. He didn't. My father, I said, the realization settling in my chest like a stone. He didn't just panic and scribble my name. He drove to Elliot's office. He printed the form. He sat there and lied to a professional. He deployed Elliot like a soldier. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a system. My father had a network of people, lawyers, accountants, notaries, who were used to taking his word as law. He had built a machine designed to protect him, and today, he had tried to feed me into the gears, but the machine had jammed. Ms. Nelson, Gomez said, her voice softening again. We have the attempted fraud recorded on video. We have the agent's admission that he did not verify the signature. This gives us leverage we didn't have 10 minutes ago. I looked at my hands. They were steady. What happens next? I asked. Now, Gomez said. We pull the rest of the thread. If he forged the power of attorney today, and he forged the responsible party form 2 years ago, there is more. People like this do not stop at one lie. They paper over the cracks until the whole house is made of paper. She stood up. Go home. Ms. Nelson, do not answer their calls. If Elliot tries to contact you, call me immediately. I stood up. I felt lighter. Strangely, the fear was gone, replaced by a cold, simmering anger. They had sent a wolf to my door. thinking I was a sheep. They forgot that even sheep have teeth when they are cornered. "I won't answer," I said. I walked out of the interview room, leaving the evidence bag on the table. The game had changed. They weren't just fighting the IRS anymore. They were fighting the witness they had created. The adrenaline from the IRS office had faded, replaced by a cold, mechanical drive to see the bottom of the hole. I was no longer running. I was excavating. I sat at my dining table, my laptop charger plugged in, a fresh pot of coffee brewing, and I logged into the Virginia State Corporation Commission's website. If the IRS had my name as the responsible party, the state had to have something too. I typed in Nelson Vista Care. The search wheel spun for a second before spitting out the entity details. Status, active, principal office, 1112 Oakwood Drive. Registered agent. Cora Nelson. I stared at the screen. A registered agent is the person legally designated to receive service of process. Lawsuits, subpoenas, state notices. It is a position of liability, and according to the filing history, I had held this title for exactly 2 years. I clicked on the annual report filing from 2 years ago. I downloaded the PDF. There was my signature again. But this time, it wasn't the shaky forgery I had seen at the IRS. This looked real. It had the heavy pressure on the downstrokes of the N. It had the slight ink blot at the end of the A. I zoomed in. I knew this signature. I remembered writing it. My mind raced back, sifting through the debris of the last few years. I was 22, fresh out of college, visiting home for a weekend. I was sitting at the kitchen table, eating toast. My mother had slid a stack of papers in front of me. "Honey, can you sign this for Daddy? It is just an insurance rider for the building. We need a backup contact in case of a fire. Since you are living in the city now." It had sounded so mundane. In case of a fire, a safety measure, a responsible thing to do. I hadn't read the whole stack. I had just flipped to the tab she pointed at, the one sticky note that said, "Sign here," and I had signed it. I opened a new tab and searched for the notary whose stamp was on the document. It was a woman who worked at the bank my father used. I called the number. "I need to verify a document notarized on June 15th, 2 years ago." I told the clerk, "I am the signatory." It took 20 minutes and a fee paid by credit card. But the image came through my email. It was the full scanned packet. I wasn't signing an insurance rider. The page I signed, page 5, was a standard signature block. But pages 1 through 4, the pages that were stapled to it after I left the kitchen table, were an operating agreement amendment. The document stripped my parents of certain liabilities and installed me as the managing member with unlimited personal guarantee for corporate debts. They had physically swapped the pages. They had used my trust, my 22-year-old naivety, to handcuff me to a sinking ship before I even knew it was taking on water. I felt a wave of nausea, but I swallowed it down. Paranoia was creeping in, but I forced it into a shape I could use. If they had used me for the state filing, where else was I? I called the bank listed on the company checks I had seen in old photos. First Dominion. "I am calling to verify my status on a business account," I said to the representative. "The business is Nelson Vista Care. I cannot give out balance information without a passcode," the voice said. Rehearsed and firm. "I don't want the balance," I said. "I want to know if I am listed as a signer." One moment, I heard the clicking of keys. Name? Cora Nelson. "Yes," the representative said. "You are listed as an authorized signer. You have been on the account since, looks like almost 3 years ago. Is there a credit line attached to the account?" "Yes, ma'am. There is a revolving line of credit and a business credit card issued in your name." "In my name?" I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. "Not the company's name? It is a business card, but it is personally guaranteed by the authorized user. That is standard for small businesses." I hung up. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I logged into my credit monitoring service. I had frozen my files yesterday, but I could still see the history. I scrolled past the good standing summary and went into the inquiries section. There they were, Hard Inquiries, Office Depot Financing, Rico Leasing, Dell Financial Services, dates scattered over the last 18 months. They were buying copiers. They were leasing laptops. They were buying office furniture. And every time they signed a lease, they used my Social Security number to guarantee it. They were furnishing their office with my credit score. I was printing the report when my cell phone buzzed. It wasn't my parents'. It was a number I recognized. The internal line from my desk at Rook and Gable. I answered. "This is Cora." "Cora, it is Sarah," my colleague whispered. She sounded nervous. "Are you coming in today?" "I am taking a personal day," I said. "Why? What is wrong?" "Listen, I shouldn't be telling you this, but someone called the general line about 20 minutes ago. They asked for the ethics department." My blood ran cold. "What did they say?" "They didn't give a name," Sarah said, "but they told the receptionist that they were a concerned citizen and that you were currently under federal investigation for tax fraud. They said a compliance officer shouldn't be managing client data if they cannot manage their own taxes." The room spun. They were scorching the earth. My father knew that if I had a job, I had money. If I had money, I could hire a lawyer. So, he was trying to cut off my supply. He was trying to get me fired so I would be destitute, broken, and forced to come back to him for help. "Did they speak to HR?" I asked. "Not yet. The receptionist transferred them, but I think it went to voicemail." "Cora, is it true?" "No," I said firmly. "It is not true. It is retaliation. Sarah, thank you." I hung up. I grabbed my keys. I grabbed the folder, the IRS affidavit, the police report number, the forged fax header. I didn't run. I drove to my office. I walked past the security desk, past my own cubicle, and went straight to the Human Resources Director's door. I knocked and walked in. "Cora?" She looked surprised. "I thought you were out today." "I am," I said, placing the folder on her desk. "But you are going to receive a phone call, or maybe you already have, alleging that I am involved in tax fraud. I am here to tell you that I am the victim of identity theft, and I am currently cooperating with the IRS in a criminal investigation regarding the perpetrators." I opened the folder. I showed her the stamp from Agent Gomez. I showed her the freeze on my credit. "This is an attempt to damage my employment status to prevent me from pursuing legal action," I said. "I am disclosing this proactively in accordance with our company's ethics policy regarding external legal matters." The director looked at the papers, then at me. She saw the timeline. She saw the police report. "We received a voicemail," she admitted quietly. "We were going to call you in for a review tomorrow." "Review the documents," I said. "I am the one pressing charges." She nodded slowly. "If this is identity theft, Cora, you are the victim. We protect our employees from harassment. We will flag the number. If they call again, we will direct them to our legal counsel." I walked out of that office 10 minutes later, my knees shaking, but my job secure. They had tried to nuke my career, and all they had done was force me to build a fortress around it. When I got back to my apartment, I saw the mail truck pulling away. I walked to the mailbox, dreading what I might find. But the box was empty, suspiciously empty. I went back inside and logged into my USPS account. I had signed up for Informed Delivery years ago, a service that emails you scans of your incoming mail, but I rarely check the dashboard. I clicked on Mail Forwarding History. The screen populated a list. Request date: 6 months ago. Status: active/redirected. Request date: 18 months ago. Status: active/redirected. There were dozens of entries, individual pieces of mail from banks, from the state, from the IRS. They hadn't just been stolen from my physical box. They had been digitally rerouted before they even got on the truck. My parents hadn't just intercepted the mail. They had been logging into the postal system, likely impersonating me, to curate exactly what I saw and what I didn't. I scrolled down to the most recent activity. Yesterday, item, IRS. Notice, CP 504. Status, delivered to original address. They had slipped, or the system had glitched. One letter had gotten through the net, just one, and that one letter was going to cost them everything. I sat at my desk, the hum of my laser printer filling the apartment. It was the only sound in the room, a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat that felt infinitely more reassuring than my own. I wasn't crying anymore. I wasn't pacing. I had moved past the point of shock and into a state of cold, administrative fury. I was on identitytheft.gov, the Federal Trade Commission's portal. I had filled out every field. I detailed the dates, the fraudulent business accounts, the unauthorized credit inquiries, and the tax debt that was currently threatening to swallow my future. When I hit submit, the site generated an identity theft report, a formal legal affidavit that gave me rights I didn't have yesterday. I printed 3 copies. The paper was warm when I picked it up. Next came the police station. Walking into the precinct was different than walking into the IRS. The IRS was sterile. The police station was chaotic. It smelled of stale coffee and desperation. I waited 40 minutes to see a desk officer, a man with tired eyes and a nameplate that read, Sergeant Miller. "I need to file a report for forgery and financial fraud," I said, sliding my folder onto the high counter. "Credit card stolen?" he asked, reaching for a standard form without looking up. "No," I said. "My identity was used to secure business loans and falsify federal tax documents. The total liability is over $250,000. That got his attention. He stopped moving and looked at me. I laid out the evidence. I didn't tell him a sob story about my childhood. I showed him the fax header from the Nelson Vista Care machine. I showed him the cover sheet with my father's handwriting. Urgent. Add responsible officer. I showed him the notary log from the bank that proved I was tricked into signing an operating agreement disguised as an insurance rider. And then I showed him the text message. I had printed a screenshot of the message my father sent me the night I found the IRS letter. "Don't do anything stupid." This was sent to me hours after I discovered the tax notice, I explained, pointing to the timestamp. "It is an attempt at intimidation. He knew I had the letter before I told him I had opened it." Sergeant Miller looked at the screenshot, then at the fax header. He saw the connection. He saw the intent. "This is a family member?" he asked. It wasn't a question of disbelief. It was a question of classification. "Yes," I said. "My father?" He nodded, a grim, resigned movement. "We see it more than you think." He typed up the report. He gave me a case number. That number was vital. It turned my claim from a family dispute into a matter of public record. When I got back to my car, I didn't go home. I sat in the parking lot and made the digital walls higher. I called the IRS special line for identity protection and requested an IPPIN, an Identity Protection Personal Identification Number. It is a 6-digit code that the IRS assigns to victims. Without it, no tax return can be filed with my Social Security number. Not by me, not by an accountant, and certainly not by Grant Nelson. If my father tried to file a tax return for the business or amend a form using my name again, the system would reject it instantly. I was locking the gate and changing the locks. Then I hit the credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, TransUnion. I didn't just put a fraud alert on them. I initiated a total freeze. No one could open a credit card, lease a copier, or buy a stick of gum on credit in my name without a PIN that only I possessed. I imagined my parents trying to lease a new delivery van for the facility next week, handing over my info, and watching the salesman's face drop when the computer flashed blocked. The thought gave me a grim sense of satisfaction. The next morning, I walked into the office of Marcus Vance. He wasn't a family friend. He wasn't someone my parents knew from the country club. He was a civil litigator who specialized in financial fraud and identity misuse. I had found him by searching for lawyers who had sued banks for negligence. His office was quiet, lined with books that looked like they had actually been read. He listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. He looked at the IRS affidavit, the police report, and the fax header. "You have done good work," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Better than most. Most people come in here crying about betrayal. You came in with paper. I am done crying, I said. Good, Vance said. Because the law does not care about your feelings. It does not care that they are your parents. It cares about authorization and intent. He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. Here is the rule. Cora, we do not fight with emotion. We fight with a timeline. Fraud is a story told out of order. Our job is to put it back in chronological order. When you line up the dates, the intent becomes obvious. He handed me a legal pad. I want a master timeline, he said. Every interaction, every document, the date the IRS letter arrived, the date and exact time of the phone call with your mother, the date Elliot Hargrove showed up at the IRS office, the dates of the address changes in the USPS system. We are going to build a map of the conspiracy. Conspiracy? The word felt heavy. That is what it is, Vance said calmly. 2 or more people working together to commit an unlawful act. Your father, your mother, and potentially their accountant. He pulled a form from his drawer. Speaking of the accountant, Vance said, Elliot Hargrove, you said he tried to file a power of attorney without your consent? Yes. The IRS agent seized the document. Excellent, Vance said. We are going to file a formal complaint with the IRS Office of Professional Responsibility and the Virginia Board of Accountancy. We are going to allege gross misconduct and facilitation of fraud. We are not just going to defend you, we are going to dismantle their infrastructure. I spent the weekend building the timeline. It was agonizing, but clarifying. January 14th, 2 years ago. Fax sent from Nelson Vista Care to IRS. Handwriting matches Grant Nelson. January 14th, 2 years ago. My status changes to responsible party. January 17th, 2 years ago. Mail forwarding request submitted. Redirecting my mail to Oakwood Drive. June 15th, 2 years ago. I signed the insurance rider, which is actually the operating agreement. When I saw it laid out like that, the why didn't matter anymore. It was mechanical. They needed a scapegoat. They groomed me, and they executed the switch. It wasn't an emotional decision for them. It was a business strategy. 3 days later, I received a notification from the IRS. It wasn't a bill. It was a status update on my case. Referral to Criminal Investigation Division, fraud detection. The wheels were turning. The agent, Gomez, had done exactly what she implied she would. She had moved the file from collections to investigation. My phone had been silent for 2 days, which was terrifying. Then, on Tuesday night, it started. 7 missed calls from my mother, 3 from my father, 2 from a number I didn't recognize, probably a new lawyer they had hired since Elliot was likely currently hyperventilating over his license. I didn't answer. I didn't block them, because Vance had told me not to. Let them call, he had said. Let them leave voicemails. Every time they speak, they might give us something. But you do not speak. You are a black hole. You absorb everything, and you give nothing back. I watched the phone light up on my coffee table. Mom calling. I let it ring. Mom calling. I let it ring. I picked up the timeline I had created. I added a new entry at the bottom. Current date. Subjects attempting contact. No response given. I wasn't lonely. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for their approval or fearing their disappointment. They were on the other side of a glass wall now. They were screaming, and I was just taking notes. The silence I had imposed on my life was heavy, but it was peaceful. Then, the assault began. It didn't start with a scream. It started with a vibration. My phone buzzed against the hardwood of my coffee table. It was a text message from my mother. It wasn't short. It was a wall of gray text that filled the entire screen. A stream of consciousness weaponized to hit every trigger she had installed in me since birth. Your father hasn't slept in 3 days. I hope you are happy. We built everything for you, and now you are tearing this family apart over paperwork. You are killing us. Cora, literally killing us. If you have any soul left, you will stop this insanity and come home. I read it twice. The old Cora, the one who existed 3 days ago, would have crumbled. She would have felt the crushing weight of guilt and driven straight to Oakwood Drive to apologize. But the new Cora looked at the text and saw it for what it was. A tactic. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask about the debt. She focused entirely on my compliance. I didn't reply. I took a screenshot. I added it to the timeline under attempted manipulation. 2 hours later, the doorbell rang. I didn't answer it. I checked the peephole. It wasn't them. It was a courier. I opened the door with the chain still on. "Delivery for Cora Nelson," the man said, bored. "Certified mail. Need a signature." I signed. The envelope was thick and rigid. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. But the client name was clear. Grant Nelson. I tore it open in the kitchen. It wasn't a love letter. It was a cease and desist order. "Dear Ms. Nelson, we represent Grant Nelson regarding the defamatory statements you have made to the Internal Revenue Service and the Virginia State Corporation Commission. Your allegations of fraud are baseless and malicious. If you do not immediately withdraw your affidavits and cease your disparagement of Nelson Vista Care, LLC, we will be forced to file suit for defamation of character and seek damages." I stared at the letter, and then a strange thing happened. I started to laugh. It was a dry, humorless sound, but it was laughter. He was threatening to sue me for telling the government that he had stolen my identity. He was trying to use the legal system to bully me into silence, not realizing that by sending this letter, he was handing me another piece of evidence. He was confirming that he knew about the investigation. He was confirming that he was hostile. I scanned the letter and emailed it to my lawyer. Marcus Vance. His reply came back 3 minutes later. "Add it to the pile. Truth is the absolute defense against defamation. Let them spend their money." But they weren't done. They realized digital threats weren't working, so they invaded my physical space. The next evening, I was walking to my car after work. The parking garage at Rook and Gable is usually quiet at 6 o'clock. My heels clicked against the concrete. I rounded the concrete pillar to row C, where I always parked, and stopped dead. A silver Lexus was parked diagonally behind my sedan, blocking me in. My father was leaning against the driver's side door, arms crossed, looking like he was waiting for a business meeting. My mother was standing by the trunk, holding a cardboard box. They looked perfectly normal. They looked like parents dropping off a care package. That was the horror of it. To anyone passing by, this was a family reunion. To me, it was an ambush. "Cora!" my mother called out, her voice echoing in the garage. She waved, a bright, frantic motion. "We brought your winter coat. You left it in the hall closet last season. We knew you would need it. It was 80 degrees outside." "Move the car," I said. I didn't walk closer. I stayed 20 feet away, near the emergency call box. "Don't be ridiculous," my father said. He pushed off the car and took a step toward me. "We just want to talk. You are being irrational. You are listening to people who don't care about you." "I said move the car," I repeated. My voice echoed. "Just come here and look at what we brought," my mother pleaded, taking a step forward. "We made your favorite cookies. Cora, please, you look so tired. Let us take care of you." It was a performance. They were trying to close the distance. If they got close enough, they would grab my arm. They would lower their voices. They would corner me physically like they had cornered me financially. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I reached out and pressed the red button on the emergency pillar. A strobe light began to flash overhead. A siren whooped. Short, sharp blasts. "What the hell are you doing?" my father hissed, looking around wildly. "Security is on the way," I said, my voice steady. "You are blocking my exit. You are trespassing." "We are your parents," my mother shrieked, the mask slipping. "You ungrateful little—" 2 uniformed security guards came jogging around the corner. "Everything okay here, Ms. Nelson?" one of them asked. He knew me. I waved to him every morning. "These people are blocking my car and refusing to leave," I said. "I would like them escorted off the property." My father looked at the guard, then at me. His face turned a color I had never seen before, a mottled, dark red. He realized he had lost the power dynamic. In this garage, I wasn't his daughter. I was an employee, and he was a threat. "We are leaving," he spat. He got into the Lexus. My mother scrambled into the passenger seat. Still clutching the box of cookies like a shield, they peeled out, tires screeching on the smooth concrete. I watched them go. My hands were shaking, but I felt a cold sense of victory. I asked the guard to file an incident report. Date, time, license plate, nature of disturbance, another brick in the wall. The social fallout started the next morning. My phone rang. It was Aunt Linda, my mother's sister. I hadn't spoken to her in months, but she left a voicemail that made my skin crawl. "Cora, I don't know what kind of mental break you are having, but calling the police on your own father, after everything they paid for, you need to get help. You are humiliating the entire family. Shame on you." They were running a smear campaign. They were telling the extended family that I was unstable, that I was having a breakdown, that I was making things up. They were isolating me, cutting off any support system I might have had in the family tree. But I had a new support system. It was made of federal agents and tax codes. I received an encrypted email from Agent Gomez later that afternoon. Update on case file. A request for a 90-day hold on collection activities was submitted this morning by the representative on record. The request was flagged and denied based on the disputed authorization status. The representative has been notified that they are no longer authorized to act on behalf of the taxpayer. I smiled. Elliot had tried to buy them more time, likely to hide assets. But the lock I put on the account held firm, but the relief was short-lived. I was digging through the state business registry again, a habit now, looking for anything else attached to their address. I typed in the address, 1112 Oakwood Drive. A list popped up, Nelson Vista Care, LLC, but there was another one below it, NVC Management Holdings, Inc. I clicked on it. It was incorporated 6 months ago. The registered agent was my father. The address was the house. It was a shell company. They had created a second entity, likely to siphon assets out of the first one before the IRS could seize them. They were preparing to let Nelson Vista Care sink with all the debt, and me, anchored to it, while they floated away on a new life raft. I was staring at the screen, processing this new layer of deceit, when I heard the mail slot clatter. I walked to the door. There was a single envelope on the floor. It wasn't from the IRS. It wasn't from a lawyer. It was from Rico Leasing. I opened it. Notice of default. Regarding lease agreement. 449022. Item. Multifunction office copier system. Total due. $15,400. Guarantor. Cora Nelson. I leaned against the door frame, the paper crinkling in my hand. This wasn't taxes. This was a private debt, a commercial lease for office equipment. They hadn't just used me for the government debt. They had used my credit score to furnish their office. They knew the tax hammer was coming, so they stopped paying the vendors too. I looked at the date of the lease. It was signed 8 months ago. I realized then that this wasn't just about saving themselves money. It was about tactical sabotage. They knew that if I found out about the taxes, I would need money to fight them. I would need to hire lawyers. I would need to pay retainers. So they loaded me up with debt. They destroyed my credit rating so I couldn't get a loan. They defaulted on leases in my name to ensure that if I tried to fight back, I would be too broke to afford a weapon. They wanted me destitute, because if I was destitute, I would have no choice but to come back to Oakwood Drive. I would have to sleep in my old room, eat their food, and sign whatever papers they put in front of me just to survive. I looked at the collection letter. $15,000 for a copier I had never touched. I walked back to my desk. I picked up the phone. I didn't call my mother. I called Marcus Vance. "We need to amend the police report," I said, my voice ice cold. "It is not just tax fraud anymore. It is grand larceny." Marcus Vance looked at me from across his mahogany desk, his fingers steepled together. "Virginia is a one-party consent state," he said. That means as long as you are part of the conversation. You can record it. You do not have to tell them. You do not have to ask permission. You just hit record and let them dig their own grave. He was responding to my question about meeting them. I was tired of the stalking, the ambush in the parking garage, and the smear campaign with the relatives. I wanted it to stop, but Vance saw a different opportunity. He saw a deposition without a court reporter. Meet them, he advised, but not at the house. Pick a neutral ground, somewhere public, somewhere loud enough to mask a quiet conversation from the next table, but crowded enough that they cannot make a scene, and bring a witness who isn't sitting at the table. I chose the Daily Grind, a coffee shop on Main Street that was always packed with college students and remote workers. It was noisy, chaotic, and safe. I arrived 20 minutes early. I wasn't alone. Sarah, my friend from work who had intercepted the nasty phone call, sat 3 tables away. She had a clear line of sight to my booth. She had her noise-canceling headphones on, but no music was playing. She was the safety net. I sat down. I placed my phone on the table, face down, with the voice memo app running. The red bar was pulsing silently against the table surface. At 10 o'clock exactly, they walked in. They looked like ghosts of the parents I remembered. My mother was wearing sunglasses indoors, her mouth set in a thin, tragic line. My father looked haggard, his usually impeccable suit slightly rumpled, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for snipers. They sat down opposite me. My father didn't order coffee. He placed his hands on the table, palms down, trying to assert dominance over the laminate surface. "I am glad you finally came to your senses," he said. His voice was low, measured, the voice of a man who believes he is the only rational person in the room. "I am here to listen," I said. I kept my hands in my lap to hide the fact that I was digging my nails into my palms. "You said you wanted to fix this." "We do," my mother said. Reaching for my hand, I pulled back. She flinched as if I had slapped her. "Cora, we are a family. Families fix things internally. We don't drag strangers and police into our business." "The IRS isn't a stranger." "Mom," I said. "They are the federal government." "It is a misunderstanding," my father cut in, impatient. "Elliot has a plan to smooth it all over, but he cannot talk to the revenue officer because you froze him out. You revoked his authorization." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a fresh power of attorney form. "Just sign this," he said, sliding it across the table. "That is all we need. You sign this. Elliot goes back in. He recategorizes the debt, and this whole nightmare goes away. You go back to your life, and we handle the business." I looked at the paper. It was the same trap, just a different day. "If I sign that," I said slowly, ensuring the microphone could pick up every syllable, "Elliot will tell the IRS that I accept the liability. He will set up a payment plan in my name." "No, no," my father said, waving his hand dismissively. "It is just procedural. He needs the authority to negotiate. If you don't give him the authority, the IRS is going to bypass the negotiation phase and start seizing assets." "Seizing whose assets?" I asked. The question hung in the air. "Mine?" I asked. "Or yours?" My father's jaw tightened. "The business assets," he said, "and personal assets attached to the guarantors." "I am the guarantor," I said. "On paper, at least, so they would seize my bank account. Why are you so worried about that? You didn't seem worried when you leased the copiers in my name." "If you don't stand in," my father snapped, his voice rising just enough to be distinct, "they will pierce the corporate veil. They will come after the original officers. They will levy our accounts. Cora, they will take the house." There it was. He didn't care that I was facing ruin. He cared that if I stepped out of the line of fire, the bullet would hit him. "So let me get this straight," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You want me to take the fall for $247,000 so you don't lose the house on Oakwood Drive." "It is not taking the fall," my mother hissed. She was crying now, but there were no tears, just wet, angry eyes. We had a bad year. Cora, the expansion into the West Wing, the contractors cheated us. We were bleeding cash. We just needed to bridge the gap. So you used the payroll taxes, I said. The money you withheld from your employees' paychecks. You spent it. We were going to pay it back, she insisted. We just needed a few months. We put your name on the paperwork because your credit was clean. We intended to switch it back as soon as the loan came through. We were borrowing your reputation, Cora. That is what families do. You forged my signature, I said. You faxed it to the IRS with a cover sheet that said, urgent. My father's face went rigid. How do you know about the cover sheet? I have the file. Dad, I said. I saw your handwriting. Urgent. Process today. You weren't borrowing my reputation. You were throwing me under the bus because the levy was starting the next morning. He slammed his hand on the table. A student at the next table looked up, startled. Stop playing the victim, my father growled. You are 34 years old. You have a job. You have time to recover. If we take this hit, we are done. We are in our 60s. We cannot start over. You won't lose anything that matters. I won't lose anything, I repeated, incredulous. My credit is ruined. My savings could be seized. I could go to prison for tax fraud if I admitted to being the responsible party. You wouldn't go to prison, he scoffed. We had a strategy, a bankruptcy strategy. I froze. What strategy? He realized he had said too much, but his arrogance pushed him forward. He wanted to prove he was smarter than me. He wanted to prove he had a plan. The plan was never to pay the full amount, he said, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Elliot set it up. We transfer the hard assets to the holding company. We leave the debt in Nelson Vista Care. The responsible officer, you, files for personal bankruptcy under Chapter 7. It discharges the business debts personally guaranteed. Your credit takes a hit for 7 years. Sure. But the debt is erased. We keep the facility, we keep the house, and you get a fresh start in a few years. I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't just theft. It was a premeditated demolition of my life. They had planned to force me into bankruptcy. They had decided, over dinner presumably, that ruining my financial record for a decade was a fair price to pay to save their retirement fund. You were going to make me file for bankruptcy, I whispered. Without even asking me. It is a financial tool, Cora, he said coldly. Don't be so dramatic. It happens every day. I looked at them. Really looked at them. I didn't see my parents. I saw two strangers who looked at their daughter and saw a disposable asset. I saw a shell company in human form. I have heard enough, I said. I picked up my phone. I stopped the recording. What? My father looked confused. Where are you going? Sign the paper. I am not signing anything, I said, standing up, and I am not filing for bankruptcy. If you walk away, he threatened, half rising from his chair, I will sue you. I will ruin you. You already tried, I said, and you failed. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back at the booth. I didn't look back at the parents who were frantically calling my name. I walked past Sarah, who gave me a subtle nod. She had heard enough to corroborate everything. I walked straight to my car, got in, and locked the doors. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. They had admitted it. They had admitted the theft, the cover-up, and the bankruptcy plot. I drove straight to Marcus Vance's office. I played the recording for him. He listened in silence, his eyes closed. When the part about the bankruptcy strategy played, a slow, shark-like smile spread across his face. That, Vance said, is the nail in the coffin. He drafted a letter while I sat there. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was a preservation of evidence letter, also known as a litigation hold. He addressed one to Elliot Hargrove and one to Nelson Vista Care, LLC. Dear Mr. Hargrove, we have credible evidence, including recorded admissions from your clients, of a conspiracy to commit tax fraud and bankruptcy fraud involving the misuse of Cora Nelson's identity. You are hereby formally notified to preserve all documents, emails, call logs, fax transmission records, and metadata related to the Nelson Vista Care account from January of 2 years ago to the present. Be advised that any destruction, alteration, or concealment of these records from this moment forward will be considered spoliation of evidence and will be met with immediate criminal referral and sanctions. We are sending this via courier today, Vance said, signing the bottom with a flourish. When Elliot reads this, he is going to realize that Grant just threw him under the bus, too. He will start looking for a deal. And my parents? I asked. Your parents just gave us the roadmap, Vance said. We don't need to guess anymore. We know where the money went. We know where the assets are hiding. And now, thanks to your father's arrogance, we know exactly how they plan to bury you. He handed me a copy of the letter. Go home, Cora. Sleep. Tomorrow. We hand this recording to Agent Gomez. I took the letter. The sun was setting over Richmond, casting long shadows across the city. I felt tired. Yes, but for the first time, I didn't feel heavy. I had walked into the fire, and I had walked out carrying the water. The final meeting with the IRS did not feel like an interrogation. It felt like an autopsy. We were dissecting the corpse of a 15-year fraud, and for the first time, I was holding the scalpel. I sat in the same hard chair in Agent Gomez's office, but the dynamic had shifted entirely. The table between us was covered in paper. It was no longer a scattering of confused notices. It was a fortress of evidence. My lawyer, Marcus Vance, sat next to me, silent and watchful, like a shark in a suit. Agent Gomez picked up the fax header I had photographed. She placed it next to the signature card from the bank. Then she placed the police report I had filed regarding the forgery next to that. Finally, she laid down the transcript of the recording from the coffee shop, the one where my father admitted to the bankruptcy strategy. We have completed the handwriting analysis, Gomez said, her voice devoid of the suspicion that had been there 2 weeks ago. The variance between the signature on the responsible party designation and your actual signature is significant. Coupled with the fax metadata originating from the business line, a location you have proven you did not work at, the conclusion is clear. She looked at me, and for a fleeting second, the mask of the bureaucrat slipped. She looked impressed. The service has determined that the assignment of the trust fund recovery penalty to your Social Security number was fraudulent, she stated. We are processing a decertification. The liability is being decoupled from your personal accounts effective immediately. The freeze on your credit will remain for your protection. But the threat of levy against your wages or savings is gone. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding since the moment I saw that envelope on my doormat. The weight on my chest, the invisible $247,000 anvil, simply vanished. What happens to the debt? I asked. The debt remains with the entity, Gomez said, tapping the file. And with the individuals who actually exercised financial control, Grant and Cynthia Nelson. She picked up another document. It was a referral form. However, she continued, her tone sharpening, this is no longer just a collection matter. Because of the evidence you provided regarding the mail redirection, specifically the USPS logs showing unauthorized access to your delivery preferences, this has escalated. Escalated how? Tampering with federal mail to conceal a tax liability is a felony, Gomez said calmly. Using a third party's identity to defraud the government is another. We are not just looking at a civil penalty anymore. We have referred the case to the Criminal Investigation Division. She turned her attention to the empty chair where Elliot Hargrove had sat during that disastrous interview. As for Mr. Hargrove, she said, the Office of Professional Responsibility has been notified. An enrolled agent who facilitates the submission of false documents does not remain an enrolled agent for long. We have already received a communication from his legal counsel. He is cooperating. He claims he was misled by your father. I almost laughed. Of course he was. The rats were eating each other. You are free to go. Ms. Nelson, Gomez said. She stood up and extended her hand. You did the right thing. Most people just pay it or hide. You fought back. I shook her hand. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, she corrected. You chose the truth. The fallout was swift and brutal. It didn't happen with a bang, but with the steady, crushing grinding of the legal gears I had set in motion. 3 days later, I received a letter in my mailbox. It wasn't forwarded, it wasn't redirected, it was addressed to me, at my apartment, with a clean, clear postmark. It was a simple confirmation from the USPS that my access codes had been reset and that all prior forwarding instructions initiated by third parties had been permanently voided. I held that letter against my chest. It was just a piece of paper, but it felt like a deed to my own soul. I had reclaimed my name. I had reclaimed my address. I had reclaimed my life. My parents, however, were losing theirs. The IRS moved with terrifying speed once the responsible party shield was removed, without me to pin the debt on. The lien hit Nelson Vista Care immediately. The business accounts were frozen. The line of credit, the one they had illegally opened in my name, was shut down as part of the fraud investigation, leaving them with no operating capital. They couldn't make payroll. The state stepped in. The facility was placed under emergency receivership. The house of cards didn't just fall, it incinerated. My father called me on a Tuesday night. I knew it would be the last time. So I answered. Cora, he said. He didn't sound like the titan of industry he always pretended to be. He didn't sound like the man who had threatened to sue me for defamation. He sounded old. His voice was thin, trembling with a mixture of rage and genuine confusion. They put a padlock on the office door today, he whispered. The bank is calling the note on the house. They are talking about indictment. Cora, prison time. I stood in my kitchen, looking at the clean granite island where this nightmare had started. I know. How could you do this? He asked, and the question was sincere. He truly didn't understand. We are your flesh and blood. You watched them destroy us, and you helped them. Do you want us to die? Do you want us to lose everything? I didn't destroy you, Dad, I said. My voice was steady, calm, and final. You destroyed yourselves the day you decided I was an asset instead of a daughter. We were saving the family, he cried out. It was just a name on a paper. It was my name, I said. And I want everything in the right name now. The debt is in your name, the fraud is in your name, and my life is finally in mine. Cora, please, he begged, the arrogance completely gone. If you just write a letter, if you just say it was a misunderstanding. Goodbye, Dad, I said. I hung up. I didn't block the number this time. I didn't need to. There was nothing left to say. The silence that followed was different from the silence of the last few weeks. It wasn't the silence of waiting for an attack. It was the silence of a battlefield after the smoke has cleared. I walked into my bedroom. On my desk sat a thick manila folder. It contained everything: the affidavit, the photos of the fax header, the timeline, the transcripts, the letters from the IRS clearing my record. I took a black marker and wrote a single word on the tab. Records. I placed it in the drawer and closed it. I didn't shred it. I would never shred it. It was my insurance policy, my history, and my victory. I turned off the desk lamp. The room plunged into darkness, save for the streetlights outside filtering through the blinds. I climbed into bed and pulled the covers up. For the first time in months, I wasn't wondering what tomorrow would bring. I knew exactly what it would bring. It would bring a day that belonged entirely to me. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I slept without dreaming of paper. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this journey and want to hear more tales of justice and revenge, make sure to subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel. Hit that like button and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people who need to hear it.